The void hummed like a distant storm, steady, endless, comforting in its own strange way. Long before Horus Lupercal became a name whispered in fear across the stars, he was simply a child drifting through the cold cradle of space, unaware of the destiny stitched into his very bones. His gene father, the emperor of mankind, had created him with purpose, but the forces of the galaxy had their own plans. Horus's incubation pod, torn from Terra by powers unseen, drifted until fate delivered him to a world far from the Emperor's light. Chthon. Chthon was nothing like the shining cities of Terra the Emperor had dreamed of. Imagine an early American steel town, but stretched across an entire planet, built downward instead of upward, carved into toxic caverns and rusted mines. It was a place where the air tasted like copper, where machinery screamed all night, and where a child learned the hardness of life long before he learned to speak. Horus landed in the deep mining settlements, where labor was life and suffering was normal. But even there, even in the lowest parts of the world, people sensed something different about the strange infant they found. He grew fast, faster than any human child. Strong, too. His eyes carried a sharpness that made grown men hesitate before speaking to him. And more than strength, he carried heart. He listened, he learned, and he felt deeply. The miners and workers who raised him, broken, exploited, and barely surviving, found in him a rare kind of warmth. When he walked among them, they felt hope, the way Americans once felt when a leader rose from humble beginnings and spoke for the people instead of above them. By the time he reached adolescence, Horus was already taller than any man in the settlements. He settled disputes without force, spoke with the charisma of someone far older, and worked beside the miners even though he did not have to. His presence changed the culture of Chthon in small but powerful ways. Gangs quieted when he approached, violence waned, and people began to believe that maybe their world, harsh as it was, could become something better. But deep beneath the surface, Chthon had enemies. Criminal factions that thrived on chaos watched Horus rise with growing fear. To them, he was a threat, not just because he was powerful, but because he inspired unity in a place built on division. And as the shadows watched him, the galaxy itself shifted. Unseen forces whispered that the Emperor was coming, following the faint trail of the sun stolen from him long ago. One cold cycle. As Horus stood at the edge of an underground cliffside overlooking the fiery glow of a smelting lake, he felt something. A pull, a presence, an instinct telling him that his life was about to change. He didn't know why. He didn't know how. But deep inside, a spark ignited. Far above, the Emperor's fleet was entering orbit, and on Chthon, the boy who would become the greatest of all Primarchs, and later the galaxy's greatest tragedy, was taking his final steps toward destiny. The day the Emperor descended on Chthon began like any other. Machines grinding, dust hanging in the air, the world trembling from the constant churn of industry. Horus was helping reinforce a collapsed mining shaft when the tremors changed. These were not the deep, familiar shudders of drilling machinery. These were steady, rhythmic, intentional, like the heartbeat of something impossibly large approaching from above. People rushed to the surface caverns, shielding their eyes as brilliant light cut through the polluted skies. For the first time in their lives, they saw something clean, bright, and golden. The Emperor's landing craft broke through the smog like a sun-piercing storm clouds. Workers fell silent. Even the criminals lurking in the shadows paused to watch the sky split open. Horus felt it before he saw it. A presence, strong, warm, commanding, but strangely familiar, like a voice he had been waiting to hear his entire life. He stepped forward, leaving behind the miners he had grown up with. His stride was steady, but his heart pounded in a way he didn't yet understand. When the Emperor emerged from the craft, time seemed to slow. His armor gleamed brighter than any metal on Chthon. His eyes held wisdom older than any world. Yet when they met Horus's, they softened. The crowd held its breath as the Emperor walked toward the towering young man. Horus, for the first time, felt small, not in stature, but in awe. "Horus," the Emperor said, his voice calm and warm, carrying the weight of a father recognizing his lost child. My son. The word son hit Horus deeper than any blow ever could. His entire life, he had felt out of place, too strong, too fast, too different. Now, with a single word, everything made sense. Without hesitation, Horus knelt. Not because he was commanded to, but because something within him finally clicked into place. The miners watched in stunned silence as the Emperor placed a hand on Horus's bowed head, a gesture of acceptance and recognition. The world of Chthon erupted in whispers. Who was this golden giant? What was Horus? And what destiny left the shadows of mine for the light of an emperor? The emperor spoke softly to Horus, telling him of Terra, of the Primarchs, of the scattered brothers he had yet to meet. He spoke of the Great Crusade, a mission to unite humanity across the stars, a mission needing leaders, warriors, and hearts strong enough to carry the weight of a galaxy. Horus listened, and though he cared for the people of Chthon deeply, he felt something awaken inside him. Purpose, belonging, destiny. Yet not everyone welcomed this reunion. Hidden among the gathering crowd, the criminal factions of Chthon watched with rising anger. Horus had disrupted their power once already. Now, with a father like this, he threatened to erase them entirely. In their eyes, the boy had become a weapon they could not allow to fall into the hands of someone so powerful. As the Emperor led Horus toward the landing craft, preparing to bring him home to Terra, unseen eyes followed with hatred, planning to strike one final blow. Horus had found his father, but in the shadows of Chthon, danger had found him too. The departure from Chthon was meant to be peaceful, a final farewell between Horus and the people who had raised him. But peace rarely survives in the places where power is threatened. As Horus followed the Emperor toward the landing platform, the air tightened with a tension only he seemed to feel. The miners smiled, proud and bittersweet, but in the shadows, unseen figures shifted, preparing for something far darker. Horus caught the first sign, a flicker of movement near the edge of the cavern wall, a glint of metal in the dim light. His instincts, sharpened by years in Chthon's underground dangers, screamed at him. Before he could speak, the blast hit. A shockwave tore through the platform, throwing miners to the ground and filling the air with choking dust. The Emperor didn't move. His psychic aura flared like a golden shield, absorbing the explosion. Horus, unharmed but shaken, looked toward the source. Dozens of armed men emerged, their faces twisted with fear and rage. They weren't soldiers. They were desperate men clinging to power in the only way they knew. Horus, one of the miners shouted. They're trying to take the Emperor. But the criminals weren't aiming at the Emperor. Their weapons were pointed at Horus. He understood immediately. They believed if they eliminated him now, their grip over Chthon would survive. He wasn't a symbol of hope to them. He was the spark that threatened to burn their empire of cruelty to ash. The Emperor stepped forward, the air humming with power, but Horus lifted a hand, not to attack, but to stop his father. Let me, he said quietly. For the first time, the Emperor saw what Chthon had made of his son, not just strength, but resolve. Horus walked alone toward the attackers. He didn't raise a weapon. He didn't show fear. He spoke with the calm authority of someone who had spent his life diffusing fights in tunnels lit only by fire and desperation. You know me, Horus said, his voice echoing through the cavern. You know what I've done for this place. You know I've never taken from you. I've only tried to stop the suffering you feed on. The criminals hesitated. Some lowered their weapons slightly. Others gritted their teeth, trying to push down the doubt creeping in. You're afraid, Horus continued. Not of me, but of what this world could become without your chains. His words cut deeper than any blade. The people who once feared the gangs now stood behind Horus, dozens turning into hundreds. A single spark became a fire point. One criminal, too desperate to think, fired. The bullet never reached its target. Horus moved with inhuman speed, catching the attacker by the wrist and disarming him effortlessly. It wasn't violent. It was controlled, almost gentle, as if Horus regretted having to do it all. The rest dropped their weapons. For the first time, the criminals who ruled Chthon realized they were no longer feared. The Emperor watched with silent pride, not because Horus had shown strength, but because he had shown mercy. When it was over, the miners approached Horus with tears, pride, and heartbreak. They had raised him, but now it was time to let him rise beyond their world. As Horus prepared to board the Emperor's ship, he looked back at Chthon one last time. The fires of the furnaces glowed behind him, but for the first time, they didn't feel like the heat of oppression. They felt like the warmth of a forge, shaping him for something greater. He didn't leave Chthon as a miner or a survivor. He left as a son of the Emperor, and the first Primarch found. But the galaxy beyond was vast, full of brothers he had never met and enemies he had yet to understand. Destiny waited for him, bright and terrible, and soon he would take his place at the Emperor's side, ready to reshape humanity, one world at a time. The journey to Terra felt like stepping into another universe. Horus had spent his life in the dim metal caverns of Chthon, where the ceiling was made of smoke and machinery. Now he moved through a ship lit with warm gold, silent and clean, carrying the quiet hum of impossible technology. Everywhere he walked, warriors in ornate armor bowed their heads in respect. It was strange. On Chthon, he had been one of them. Here, he was something more. Yet, even with all the wonder around him, Horus kept glancing at the Emperor. There was comfort in his presence, a silent promise that Horus was no longer alone in the galaxy. The Emperor didn't speak much on the journey, but when he did, the words carried weight, explaining Terra, humanity's fractured history, and the great task ahead. Horus listened with the focus of someone who had spent his life waiting for purpose. When Terra finally came into view, Horus stood at the viewport for a long time. It wasn't like the murals the miners sketched for fun. It wasn't myth or rumor. It was real, the cradle of humanity, glowing with oceans, continents, and the lights of sprawling megacities. Horus felt something stir inside him. Not fear, but expectation. The reception on Terra was unlike anything he had imagined. Crowds filled the plazas, lining the marble causeways that led to the Imperial Palace. Some held banners. Others simply watched in awe as the fleet descended. Horus stepped onto the landing platform beside the Emperor, and the roar of humanity washed over him like a wave. But the moment that mattered most was quieter. The Emperor led him through towering halls filled with relics and histories older than any world Horus had known. They stopped before a great chamber sealed by a vaulted arch of gold. When the doors opened, Horus was surrounded by sight after sight. Ancient weapons, books, monuments, and the preserved memories of ages long gone. This, the Emperor said, is the weight of what you will inherit. Horus walked among the relics slowly. He touched nothing, but felt everything. The stories of humanity's suffering, its triumphs, its failures. A responsibility he had never known settled onto his shoulders, heavy but welcome. Soon after, the Emperor introduced him to the legions of Astartes. They were massive warriors, disciplined and unstoppable, yet even they paused when Horus entered. They could feel it. He was their gene father, the one whose blood shaped their strength. One captain approached and knelt. "My lord," he said, voice trembling with loyalty, "we are yours to command." Horus didn't know what to say. On Chthon, leadership had come naturally because people saw him as one of their own. Here, these soldiers treated him like something closer to a legend. The Emperor watched closely, wanting to see how his first-found son would respond to power. Horus placed a hand on the captain's shoulder. "Not as a superior, but as a brother. Stand," he said. "I'll lead not by standing above you, but beside you." Those words changed everything. For the first time, the legions felt not just commanded, but understood that in the days that followed, Horus trained with them, learned Terran strategy, studied galactic politics, and sparred with warriors who had seen more battles than most men lived years. He adapted instantly. Every lesson seemed to awaken something already inside him, as if he were remembering rather than learning. Yet even in this new life, something gnawed at him. The knowledge that he had brothers out there, scattered across unknown worlds. Some younger, some older, all created from the same divine purpose. Horus felt an ache, not for power, but for family. He wanted to meet them, to know them, to understand what their lives had become without the Emperor's guidance. One night, while the twin moons of Terra cast pale light over the palace grounds, the emperor approached him on a quiet balcony. "You are ready," he said. "Tomorrow, your command begins. The Great Crusade awaits." Horus turned, feeling the enormity of those words. He had gone from orphan to leader of legions in a span of days. But he did not feel overwhelmed. He felt alive. "What would you have me do?" he asked. "Unite humanity," the emperor replied. "Bring back our lost worlds. And when you find your brothers, guide them. Protect them. They will look to you." Horus nodded, but deep down something flickered. Excitement, uncertainty, longing. He didn't yet know that some brothers would love him, some would envy him, and some would fear him. He only knew that the galaxy was waiting, and he was ready to step into it. The launch of the Great Crusade felt like the beginning of an age. Entire fleets rose from Terra in perfect formation, engines burning bright against the black of space. Horus stood at the helm of his flagship, now bearing the name Vengeful Spirit, and watched as thousands of ships moved at his command. It was a sight that would have stunned the boy he once was, but the man he had become embraced it naturally. Purpose filled him like breath. World after world opened before the crusade. Some planets joined eagerly, desperate for unity. Others resisted, hardened by isolation or ruled by tyrants who feared losing their thrones. Horus faced both kinds with equal resolve. His compassion won over worlds that had forgotten humanity, and his strength shattered those who preyed upon the weak. Wherever he went, stories followed. Of a commander who fought at the front lines, who bled with his soldiers, who listened more than he commanded. It didn't take long for the other Primarchs to hear whispers of him. The first brother he met was Leman Russ. Their meeting had nearly turned into a brawl. The Wolf King eager to test the strength of the Emperor's first found son. But the clash ended in laughter, mutual respect, and the beginnings of a bond that felt ancient. After Russ came Fulgrim, whose elegance matched Horus's charisma. Then Ferrus Manus, Rogel Dorn, Vulcan, and the others. Each meeting mattered. Each connection shaped Horus in ways he didn't yet understand. But with every brother he met, something else grew. Expectation. The Emperor watched closely as Horus expanded the Imperium's reach. With every victory, trust deepened. The legions adored him. Humanity admired him. Even the other Primarchs felt the pull of his confidence, his warmth, his unmatched ability to unite. It was after a decisive campaign, one that saved an entire system from a brutal tyrant. But the Emperor summoned him privately. The palace aboard the flagship was silent, lit only by soft golden light. The Emperor stood at its center, not in armor, but in quiet dignity. "Horus," he said, "you have surpassed every hope I placed in you." Horus bowed his head, though a part of him still felt unworthy. "I only did what I believed was right. And it is for that reason," the Emperor continued, "that I choose you." The silence that followed felt like the pause before a sunrise. "You will be Warmaster," the Emperor said. "You will lead the Great Crusade in my stead." Horus felt the breath leave his body. Warmaster, the supreme commander of all Imperial forces, answering to none but the Emperor himself. It was an honor greater than he had imagined possible. The weight was immense, but it fit him with the natural ease of destiny. Yet the moment wasn't joyful. It was heavy, because with the Emperor's next words, everything changed. "I must return to Terra. There are works I must complete. The Imperium needs more than conquest. It needs stability, order, a future. You will continue the crusade in my name." Horus understood, but a strange ache spread through his chest. He had only just found his father. He wasn't ready to see him leave, not again. But he forced a smile, proud and determined. "I will not fail you," he said. "I know," the Emperor replied. When the announcement was made public, the galaxy erupted in celebration. Legions cheered. Generals shouted their loyalty. Some Primarchs embraced Horus, Fulgrim with pride, Russ with a roar of approval. But others watched quietly, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. A few wondered why he had been chosen. The seeds of doubt were small, almost invisible. But seeds, once planted, always grow. That night, Horus stood alone on the observation deck of the Vengeful Spirit, staring at the stars. The galaxy stretched before him, vast, chaotic, full of both promise and danger. He felt pride, yes. Honor, absolutely. But beneath it all was something else, the faint echo of fear. Fear of failing his father. Fear of losing the unity he fought so hard to build. Fear of what the future held now that the Emperor's guiding hand would be absent from the front lines. Horus clenched his fist, steadying his breath. He would lead the crusade. He would unite humanity. He would prove himself worthy. What he did not know, what no one could see yet, was that greatness and tragedy often walk the same path, and his journey, glorious as it was, had already begun to darken at the edges.